What is good, ladies and gentlemen? Let's get started with another SK Wealth Academy podcast. Now, before I get started on this podcast, if you have not yet listened or viewed my podcast that is titled What I Was Telling SK Wealth Academy Patreons About Silver in February, when the rest of the world was saying silver was going to explode higher, please do go check that out, because in that particular podcast, I give you specific dates of actual daily videos that my Patreons received during that time, and the price of gold and the price of silver at the exact time my videos were released, and my predictions for where the prices of gold and silver were going to head, which were obviously against the consensus, and how my predictions turned out. So you can go check that out. Now, a lot of you follow me on my new site at malamalama.com/WordPress, which you can find in the show notes below. And you can also subscribe to my absolutely free newsletter there as well. And you'll see that I provide from time to time some information about gold and silver price predictions, but basically just very general predictions. So I reserve the most high value content for my patrons at the SK Wealth Academy Patreon platform. So if you want to see the difference, then just go check out that prior podcast. Now, one thing you can see if you check out my news site, that in the last month of last year, December 7th, I published an article titled Still Not Completely Out of the Danger Zone for Gold and Silver Prices. And I published that because the sentiment back then, if you can recall, because it's not too long ago, it's only about 3 months ago, or about 4 months ago, that a lot of people were saying that the gold and silver push down in price was over, because on December 7th, gold was about $100 higher in the futures market than it had been about a week prior to that time. So from the beginning of December to about December 7th of 2020, gold rose $100, and a lot of the sentiment was that gold and silver prices had bottomed, and now we were back on our way up. But I wrote a warning saying still not completely out of the danger zone. Now, at that time, the price of gold was around $1,878, and as I'm recording this particular podcast, we're back down to nearly $1,700. So though gold did continue to rise for a few more days after that, I basically said that it was going to get pushed lower than the $1,878 mark on December 7th once again. And we saw, of course, that it's in March of 2021, we're now almost $180 below that price. But as far as, receiving a very general kind of prediction like that versus receiving predictions every single week, which my patrons receive, as far as where the gold and silver price is going to head, you can go look at my last podcast. Now, in this particular podcast, I've discovered that when you tell the truth about a lot of issues when it comes to global financial issues, that a much better approach is really to pose a question. Don't answer it, but just pose a question that will make people think a lot, because it's the thought process, it's the critical thinking process that will enable people to see the truth. Because I've discovered over the 16 years I've been publishing podcasts, videos, publishing articles online about financial issues, that if you just tell the people the truth, those that already know that what you're stating is truth are going to believe you, and those that don't believe you're telling the truth are never going to believe you, and you never convince anyone either way, right, to change their mind. So the best approach I've found, and why do I say this? Because back in 2009, which is more than a decade ago, I was publishing a lot of articles about how gold and silver prices were so manipulated. And it's really funny because I would also talk to friends I had in the banking industry. I remember I talked to friends of mine that were working at HSBC and other really big global banks that are notorious for systemic criminality and manipulation of not only commodity prices, but for Forex prices, currency market manipulation, oil price manipulation, you name it, as well as drug cartel laundering, which HSBC, of course, was famous for laundering money of the Sinaloa drug cartel, the most violent drug cartel at that time that was led by El Chapo Guzman in Mexico. Now, I'll tell you a story of a JP Morgan cargo ship that was discovered to be holding, which a lot of people don't know about these stories, and again, I left the banking industry more than 15 years ago because I just found it to be systemically criminal, and I was disgusted by the criminal behavior I witnessed every single day. So I left, but I've really stayed in tune with what's going on in this industry. A lot of people don't know about these items because there was a cargo ship belonging to JP Morgan just a couple years ago on which 20 tons, not kilograms, 20 tons, that's more than 40,000 pounds. So almost, because a ton is 2,000 pounds, right? So it's more than 40,000 pounds of cocaine on board. So I'll get into that later. But the whole point of this story is that I am going to reveal what a lot of bankers are saying about cryptocurrency, why a lot of people in the cryptocurrency world are really, really pleased with what these bankers are saying because they're favoring cryptocurrency, and why it's so foolish to do that by posing a question, okay? Because I'm going to show why these people should not be trusted, okay? So back in 2009, I was saying before I went off on the JP Morgan cargo ship holding 20 tons of cocaine tangent that I had basically been mentioning a lot or publishing a lot of material in which I claimed that these big bullion banks, the ones that work with the U.S. Treasury Department to suppress the price of gold and silver, were indeed suppressing the price of gold and silver in the futures markets. And so many people back then said, oh, that's ridiculous. That's complete conspiracy theory. I was saying I had a friend who worked for HSBC said, oh, if that were so true, that we were committing all this criminal activity, and this was just in regard to laundering money for the Sinaloa drug cartel. He said that would have meant some of us would have went to jail. But since nobody went to jail, then obviously we committed no criminal activity, which is a really ludicrous viewpoint because the way that the legal system has been set up in many nations around the world has nothing to do with morality. Okay, a lot of criminal activity has been legalized, so that's why people don't go to jail for committing criminal, immoral, highly immoral behavior, because they're the ones that basically are spending billions of dollars on lobbyists that basically lobby the lawmakers that make these laws. So a lot of times laws in the financial world have nothing to do with criminality, to right and wrong, right? Truth is immutable. So whether it's has been legalized, financial crime has been legalized, that does not change right or wrong. And I will even give you an example of how in the Bitcoin industry, because a lot of times when I reveal truth about Bitcoin, that's why I'm saying I'm going to really just pose questions in this particular podcast. Those that can really get over their biases, right? Meaning that if they are holding a certain asset, they're holding Bitcoin, then anything that might harm their perception, not the truth, might harm their perception of Bitcoin will be completely dismissed because people have not learned how to be non-biased in how they view indisputable evidence that suggests something. So they will, in fact, dismiss truths because they don't hold truths to be immutable, okay? And that happens with everything. That happens with like gold bulls, silver bulls. So I'm not, trying to just bash on Bitcoin hodlers, right? That applies to everyone that is a big accumulator of a certain asset. They'll dismiss anything negative that perhaps may come up about the price rising, right? Because if you're holding an asset, you want the price to rise, right? If you're holding an asset long or holding the physical asset. So I'm going to begin by saying that, a lot of the things that the claims I made that, of course, bankers are manipulating gold and silver prices that I made back in like 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. It was over a decade before people finally came around. Some people actually came back to me and said, oh my God, I remember when you said more than a decade ago this, and I thought you were just ridiculous in stating that. And now they're like, I completely believe you. But what is their belief, you see, is not based upon truth. Their belief, the reason they changed their views was because bankers admitted in court to manipulating gold and silver. So that's the only, if the bankers had not admitted, even though the evidence, there's indisputable evidence when I was making these claims, these people still will not believe me today, trust me. So there was like Daniel James Plunkett of Barclays Bank that admitted, one banker in the entire world, right, admitted that he could move the price of gold, which is just absurd. One banker was moving the price of gold, because what he basically did, there was a Barclays Bank client that was holding positions, I believe it was gold futures, derivative products, was long, and if they pushed the price of gold below a certain point, then they would not, or I believe he was holding options, so he's holding calls on gold, betting on the price going up, and it was a few $1 million. So by pushing the price down, they avoided a few $1 million payout to their client. But it wasn't just Barclays Bank. There were numerous bankers, 4 in total at JP Morgan. So there's one that I follow, whose case I followed for a long time, because I was really, really hoping that he would get sentenced to prison, because he pled guilty in 2018 to manipulating the price of gold, platinum, silver, and palladium in the precious metals market, in the futures markets in New York. And 3 other JP Morgan bankers had come over from Bear Stearns, which before Bear Stearns collapsed during the 2008 global financial crisis, they were the main manipulators of silver, those bankers that worked for Bear Stearns. And when Bear Stearns collapsed during the 2008 global financial crisis, JP Morgan agreed to take over all the Bear Stearns shorts. So of course, their vested interest at JP Morgan became to suppress the price of silvers, because they had to find a way to exit those shorts in the silver futures markets at a profit, because that's all they care about, making profit. So the other 3 bankers, because I want to name these people by name, because a lot of people don't know their name, but they deserve to be named. Greg Smith, so that's Grgg Smith, Michael Nowak, Nowak, or Nowak, and Christopher Jordan. And so they were charged by the Assistant Attorney General Brian Benskowski of the U.S. Justice Department in 2019 of engaging in, quote, a massive multi-year scheme to manipulate the market for precious metals futures contracts and defraud market participants. Okay, so none of them have been charged. And it's crazy, because John Edmonds, who pled guilty more than 2 full years ago, because we're in March of 2021, he pled guilty in December of 2018, and his sentencing, I was hoping he would get a multi-year sentence, right? Because that would be the first banker that was sent to prison for multiple years for defrauding market participants and slamming the prices of gold, silver, platinum, and palladium in the futures markets. And he was scheduled to be sentenced at least twice, and it's been postponed, And it was believed that his sentencing was postponed because he was singing like a bird, right? So he was snitching, and his snitching led to the further arrest of those three criminal bankers I just named. JP Morgan precious metals traders, Greg Smith, Michael Nowak, and Christopher Jordan. And although that has not been confirmed, it was believed he'd been singing, and his testimony led to the rest of those other three JP Morgan bankers. But none of them have been sentenced. So John Edmonds was scheduled to be sentenced twice. It was postponed. And the only thing in March of 2021 that exists on the U.S. Justice Department site, I could email them, say, hey, what happened to John Edmonds? But they never really reply anything. So I've tried to in the past. So I'm not going to waste my time anymore. I'm just going to assume that they're going to quietly let all these bankers go, which is really ironic. And I'll tell you the great irony of this, right? Because the only thing on the U.S. Justice Department that stated about the John Edmonds criminal gold and silver price, silver, platinum, palladium manipulation price fraud was that he was scheduled to be sentenced on June of 2020. But nothing further. There's no further mention. So I'm assuming he hasn't been sentenced, and maybe they're going to quietly let him go. Now, Christian Trumps is another JP Morgan banker that he pled guilty to gold price manipulation in 2019. And he stated that he had manipulated gold for 9 years. 9 years. So think about all these people they defrauded, all the market participants. It probably amounted to hundreds of millions of dollars because they've been at this for decades. Okay, so with the other three bankers, Greg Smith, Michael Nowak, and Christopher Jordan, they admitted that they had manipulated gold prices thousands of times. They said thousands. So this is not like some little small little racket they had going. This was systemic throughout JP Morgan. And not only that, when they were charged, they were charged with bank, wire, commodities fraud, price manipulation, and spoofing, and, quote, conspiracy to conduct the affairs of an enterprise involved in interstate or foreign commerce through a pattern of racketeering activity, end quote. So at that time, they were being charged under the RICO Act. What is the RICO Act? The RICO Act is a Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. That is normally reserved to prosecute gangsters. Like Al Capone, famous Chicago gangster back in the mobland days, was prosecuted for tax evasion under the RICO Act. This is when you have a party or institution that is a systemically criminal organization. So they're prosecuting JP Morgan bankers under a racketeering act, which just shows you, and that's why I said it was so ironic, right? Because people are like stating, oh my God, their U.S. Justice Department is prosecuting JP Morgan bankers under a racketeering act. That shows how serious they are. All four of those bankers are going to serve multiple years in prison for their role in defrauding thousands of market participants profits in gold and silver by slamming gold and silver prices lower, and nothing has happened. That's why I say it's so ironic, right? I think that was all dog and pony show from the U.S. Justice Department, the FBI, and all the other entities involved. They're just saying, oh, we're really serious this time, and nothing has happened since that time. And the reason why I said, how does Bitcoin fit into all this? Well, okay, this is how Bitcoin fits into all this, because back then, remember I said there's indisputable proof all the way back in 2009 that they were doing this, and it took them 10 years later, 2019, to finally arrest them, charge them, and they still have not been sentenced, right, 2 years later. So back in 2009, through data provided by Nanex, right, which is a data provider in gold futures markets that breaks it down, and you can see fractions of a second, the live trading that's going on in the gold and silver futures markets. And both markets, you can see mathematical patterns that were representative of algorithmic trading. So non-human trading, in other words, computer-driven trading, which also there were perfect step-down patterns, from a geometric standpoint. Each sequence was exactly the same as far as like a mathematical decline in the price. So that is impossible to happen in free trading. It is 100% indisputable evidence of price manipulation, right? So even though that existed in 2009, 2010, 2011, you know who's presiding over that? Who is the chair of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, who I actually wrote with some of this data and sent that data, which is a big mistake because then the bankers came after me hard. You know, they shut down my credit card, my online credit card. They shut for my business at that time. They shut down my shopping cart. They froze my bank accounts. They ruined my business. That's why I'm trying to launch SK Wealth Academy now. I had to come up with a new business because that led to the ruining of my business, being that I called them out on this criminal behavior. And during that time, Gary Gensler showed that he has no moral backbone. He's a soulless vampire because you had indisputable evidence of criminal activity. He presided over the CFTC, the U.S. Commodities Futures and Trading Commission, when I sent data to one of their board members of this indisputable evidence of criminal racketeering that was going on in the silver futures markets by these big global banks. And Gary Gensler did nothing. In fact, all he did was he pretended like he was hard on crime. He kept saying he was going to keep this investigation going, and he kept it going for 5 years. And during those 5 years, he fooled a lot of people, because you can recall back then, even though in year one I said, I'm not fooled by this. I know how these bankers operate. I'm not fooled into thinking they're actually conducting over at the CFTC some kind of real investigation, because like I said, there's indisputable evidence. So they could go arrest all these bankers at JP Morgan now instead of waiting 10 years later. It wasn't even based upon CFTC driven evidence, right? So the US Justice Department had to come in because the CFTC was aiding and abetting crime, not enforcing and clamping down on crime. And again, Gary Gensler was the chairman of the CFTC back then. And he concluded in 2013, after a 5-year investigation into silver price manipulation, that there's no evidence of criminal activity, which is ridiculous, right? Because 2019, just 6 years later, all these bankers of JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank bankers admitted to manipulating silver prices. And, you know, it's really interesting because the way that they let Gary Gensler off the hook, right, was because I believe they said they manipulated for a period after Gary Gensler resigned as chairman of the CFTC. So I believe the period of like price manipulation for even these JP Morgan bankers, they're always saying it was sometime between like 2015 to 2018 or something. You know, it's just periods after Gary Gensler resigned, but everybody knows they've been manipulating prices for decades. So it's just to try to give Gensler a way out of the fact that he presided at indisputable evidence, almost certainly of this criminal activity, and then just washed his hand like Pontius Pilate and sent every honest person to death by not prosecuting these criminals. Okay, I mean, you know, not literally sending them to death, but sending their money to die, because JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, along with Deutsche Bank bankers, when they admitted manipulating the price of silver, they said HSBC bankers were involved, Bank of Nova Scotia bankers were involved. I already told you Barclays bankers were involved. So they're sending their money to death is what I was actually saying. So Gary Gensler was allowing these bankers just to defraud and steal money from thousands of market participants in gold and silver markets at that time. Now, I told you that there is going to be a tie-in to Bitcoin. So what's the tie-in? Well, okay, here's the tie-in. Gary Gensler now, under U.S. President Joe Biden, has been appointed as a chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission, the SEC. So you always see how it's a revolving door, right? Gary Gensler was a professor in Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and then he was like the assistant undersecretary, I believe, of the U.S. Treasury Department for a while. He's a big shot at Goldman Sachs. Then he was the chair of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. It's a revolving door. They keep the same criminals in. Why did I mention MIT? Because they're sent to these schools to just spread propaganda so people don't understand the game I'm telling you about right now. Because he's just like Ben Bernanke, right? Again, former chair of the US Fed Reserve, professor of Princeton. So that's why I say that if you go to school for business or you earn your master's of business administration, your master of business administration degree, that is just a complete waste of time. You're wasting money, your time, your energy on rubbish degrees in which you're learning propaganda and not how markets truly work in any kind of realistic capacity. Okay, so Gary Gensler now is being favored by the Bitcoin community. He's being hailed by them for his understanding of blockchain technologies and by making all these favorable comments that promote higher prices for Bitcoin. So here's the question. Okay, before I even get into that, okay, because Gensler said, quote, Bitcoin came into existence as mining began as an incentive in validating a distributed platform. And he also said Bitcoin doesn't qualify as a security. So that's why the Bitcoin crowd loves Gensler, because as you all know, Ripple was slammed and cut in half in price immediately after the SEC declared Ripple security, because they were saying it was violating numerous security laws. So then all the cryptocurrency trading platforms had to ban trading of Ripple, which caused its price to plunge at that time by 50% overnight. Okay, so here's the other thing that would make me very, very wary. It makes it very hard for me to understand why the crypto and Bitcoin community love Gary Gensler, because I just revealed he has zero moral backbone. He's a soulless vampire. People point to U.S. Federal Reserve president of the St. Louis branch of the U.S. Federal Reserve, Jim Bullard, also as saying cryptocurrency poses no threat to the U.S. dollar. Okay, so they took that as a sign. Okay, the U.S. Federal Reserve, U.S. central bankers don't really care about Bitcoin. They'll let it go as high as it wants, because he made that comment when Bitcoin was at 50,000. Then, as you know, it went to about 58,000, I think. Then it fell to 42,000, and now, as I speak, it's back over $50,000. And so people said, "Oh, okay, so the U.S. central bank is not going to mess with Bitcoin prices." So they saw that as a positive, and they say, "Why are these central bankers and Goldman Sachs guys making these very public comments?" Because nothing happens without very careful planning. Okay, so these comments aren't made off the cuff by U.S. central bankers, not off the cuff by Goldman Sachs guy Gary Gensler. And then these comments always drive the price of Bitcoin higher. So people say, hey, why are they supporting and trying to drive Bitcoin prices higher? And people say that with the central banker that made this comment, he said a dollar global economy really, as far as the eye can see, he said will always last, right? And that, quote, whether the gold price goes up or down or the Bitcoin price goes up or down doesn't really affect that, meaning the US dollar as the king currency in the entire world. So you always know that whatever these people say can never be taken at face value. Okay, there's always some kind of psychological game they're playing. So that to me would mean, when the central banker says this, that they are keeping an extremely close eye on the prices of gold and Bitcoin, because they know, obviously, that the prices affect the US dollar. And especially gold and Bitcoin prices tend to be inversely related. Not direct, there's not a direct relationship, and it's not one that always holds true, but as money pours into Bitcoin and drives it higher, money, then a lot of people sometimes draw money out of gold derivative products or sell physical gold to buy Bitcoin, and so gold prices will then go down. Because the mania in Bitcoin prices, it draws money out of people investing in buying physical gold. So it often causes gold prices to go down. So the thing I would ask, okay, here's the question, right, that I'm getting to, is why in the world are Gary Gensler and other U.S. central bankers so favorable to Bitcoin when these same people you can see are so anti-gold and anti-silver? Because people say, I think most cryptocurrency advocates I've spoken to over the past decade agree that, again, gold is an alternative to fiat currencies being used in the global banking system. So it's an anti-fiat currency, sound money. And then there's other Bitcoin advocates, these same Bitcoin advocates will say cryptocurrencies, also the anti-fiat currency system. It's a solution to fiat currencies like the US dollar that lose significant amounts of purchasing power every single year. So if you don't understand why that is, because you may say, oh, look at inflation, it's only 1.6% per year. That's what the US government is saying. Then you really have to understand how official rates of inflation are calculated, because official rates of inflation are really understating the real rates of inflation by sometimes multiples of 5, 6, and possibly even more. So that's not the real rates of inflation. The US dollar's purchasing power is severely declining every single year. And so, you know, people will say if both gold, silver, or actually all three, if gold, silver, and Bitcoin are all solutions to the problem of fiat currencies, whether it's the euro, the US dollar, the yen, the British pound sterling, greatly devaluing in purchasing power every single year, which they all are, then shouldn't these people like Gary Gensler be anti all three of them? Ask yourself that question. Why is he anti-gold? Why is he anti-silver? Because I already told you he presided over a period where indisputable evidence existed of criminal manipulation executed by bankers that Gary Gensler probably even knew. Or obviously he knew of the CEOs, right? Obviously he's met with the JP Morgan CEO, Jamie Dimon. He probably met with the Goldman Sachs CEOs at the time, Lloyd Blankfein, and can't remember who succeeded him, the CEO of HSBC at the time was Stuart Gulliver. He probably knows all these guys on a first name basis and meets with them. So, and knows that of the criminality that's going on in gold and silver price suppression schemes executed by all these banks. So why is he not supporting the price of gold and silver going higher, but he's supporting the price of Bitcoin going higher? Ask yourself that, and you may come to the correct conclusion of what is really happening in these psychological games where, again, like I said, you can never take what's presented at face value at the surface level and ever believe that that is the truth about what's really going on. The real reality of what's really going on in the global financial world always is deeply hidden beneath the surface. And like I said, you can go again to my podcast. It's just like maybe 1 or 2 or 3 podcasts ago on my YouTube channel, in which I said, this is what SK Wealth Academy was, meaning myself, was telling my patrons was going to happen with gold and silver prices when the rest of the world was saying silver prices were going to explode higher in the month of February and into early March and lead gold prices higher. And just go and see that, because again, on the surface level, if you look at all that, because if you go to that particular podcast, I'll show you all the headlines of all these people saying gold, silver going to the moon, silver going to $1,000, silver squeezes going to cause a default physical delivery in New York of the silver futures market, and silver to explode higher. Everything, precious metals will explode higher. We're on the verge. It's going to happen within weeks. And I was saying the exact opposite, okay? So again, the truth is never there at the surface level, or very rarely. Sometimes it does exist at the surface level, but very, very rarely. And you have to ask that question. Why is Gary Gensler so anti-gold, anti-silver, but pro-Bitcoin? Okay, thanks so much for watching, and as always, remain intensely curious. And if you would like to support me, you can go to patreon.com, because some people, they find the information I provide on my channel valuable, so they just go to Patreon just to kick me back $3, $5, $10 a month, and in appreciation for, if you appreciate the hard work and research I put into a lot of these videos, I would thank you and give you a martial arts oath for your support. If you'd like to support me on GoFundMe, you can as well. You can find the links in the show notes below. And what is free is I have a free newsletter you can subscribe to at my news site, which you can find in the link below. I have free podcasts, downloadable MP3, so you can listen on the go to these podcasts as well. And that's at Podbean. The link is below. And if you're interested in martial arts, you can even go to my Instagram, because I post from time to time. You'll see just a little link that says martial arts. Okay, thanks so much for watching. And as always, remain strong, remain united, most importantly of all. Take care.